Nope, you cannot beat any tracks as you always spawn on a road. Thanks for watching. Like, comment, subscribe, hit that bell, and buy my book. Okay, obviously you always start on a road, so for this challenge, we'll drive straight off it whenever we start, heading towards the nearest non-road. Now, you might be wondering, what, for the sake of this challenge, is a road? We'll get to my explanation of that, but first I just want to show you guys Shy Guy Bazaar. Fellas, Shy Guy Bazaar is the coolest thing I found while making this. Even if you click off this video immediately after, you gotta see this. I'm putting the milk at the front of the grocery store. Starting with an example will also help to illustrate what may or may not be a road. Okay, so the race starts and we immediately drive into this patch of sand. Then we back up a little bit so that we're able to build up a charge jump, which allows us to get onto this grind rail. We ride on it for a little bit before jumping onto one of these ropes at this specific angle. This route is already a sick part of this track, and it brings us to these rooftops. Now, I don't know about anyone else, but I've never driven a car on top of a roof before, so I don't know how this could possibly be seen as a road. We follow the roof for a little bit before coming to this jump. Normally at this point you're supposed to fall down to the road, but we have a fear of asphalt, so instead we drive onto this boost pad while turning towards the wall. Turning inward is very important. You can't do this straight on. We trick off the boost, which allows us to start wall running, all while holding right on the analog stick. If we got the angle of our turn just right, instead of falling, we'll move up enough to slam straight into this corner of the neighboring roof. From here, we can safely drop onto the grass below. This next jump is slightly tricky, but we're able to charge a jump in the grass, which lets us get onto this wall, then the grind rail, and finally back onto the rooftops. From here, we're basically in the home stretch, but I like to take this roundabout path with more grind rails just so I'm absolutely sure we're minimizing our use of roads. Then we jump onto this flying pad, which allows us to touch down on the sand before cruising over to here. Now, I know this looks bad. Personally, I would actually argue that this side section is not a road, and from here you can simply stroll to victory. That's not very satisfying though. If it were possible to jump onto this wall, it'd be very simple, but the angles are all awkward. If we could consistently bring a feather with us to this point, it could also be a fairly simple victory. I guess now is a good time to finally define, what exactly is a road? It's easiest to start by saying what a road isn't. I would say that it's pretty cut and dry that grind rails, water, gliding, and wall running don't constitute roads. Another easy way to figure out if something isn't a road is if it's off-road, which generally slows down your vehicle, makes your tires big, and causes some sort of particle to get kicked up. From there, we basically have to use our personal judgment for everything else in the game. Like earlier, even though the roofs in Shy Guy Bazaar don't slow you down, I think it's pretty reasonable to not call them a road. This also goes in reverse though. Even if a material isn't something we would traditionally think of as a road, if it's the main thing we drive along and it doesn't slow you down, then it's a road. Think of the bones in Dry Bones Burnout, for instance. One last indicator that something isn't a road is if the section isn't part of the minimap. That's a pretty good chance you're not on the road, although it's not a guarantee. Follow this in mind, just to help us avoid dealing with semantics as much as possible. If I have the opportunity to travel on something like a grind rail, then we'll always take that pathway, so we don't have to think about it. Luckily, the tracks that are possible don't really include much debating of what is a road, so we won't really get slowed down by that. Okay, finally, let's move on to talking about what tracks are and aren't possible. I'll be playing in time trial mode for consistency, and I've put the tracks into 4 categories. The first 2 are tracks which are possible and impossible. The other 2 categories are tracks which are almost possible, but have one part which stops them. The final category is tracks which I think could be theoretically doable, but have major roadblocks. Let's start with the tracks which are completely possible. Desert Hills is easy mode. You can immediately drive off-road, and then it's just 3 slow circles around the track and you're victorious. Honestly, kinda boring. Cheep Cheep Falls is really easy because most of the track takes place in water, and you can immediately drive into the grass and reach this rail. The most intensive thing is jumping off the starting rail while aiming left to land in this patch of grass, which lets you entirely avoid the road. Rinse and repeat 3 times. For a little bit, I was actually worried that this stone bit at the start of the track was even more road, and I would have to go into free roam to deliberate between it being a road or a sidewalk. Luckily, I didn't need to do that, since you can just charge a jump and bounce off this bell and safely make it to the other side. Moo Meadows is pretty tricky. There's a lot of off-road around this track, which is easy to cruise in, but it's also filled with these branching roads which go out into the open world. Even though these branches aren't the main track you drive, I would definitely still consider them to be a road. Luckily for us, all of them are blocked off by these barriers, which are the ticket to victory. Starting the race, we can drive into this patch of grass and immediately charge a jump to easily cross to the other side. For the rest of the track, we have to aim our jumps just right to land on top of the barriers without breaking them. This lets us carefully drive to the other side. The final barrier is very tricky, and I only did it once, but you're just barely able to make it across. The ending section also has some conveniently placed metal squares, which you can cross with normal hops. Faraway Oasis is a close one, but ends up doable. To start off, we drive straight into the grass, and eventually we end up in some water, before we get onto this grind rail. We have to do a slightly tricky jump to go straight from this one onto the next, and afterwards we jump straight into this off-road. Then immediately aim ourselves mid-air to be able to land on this grind rail. We quickly swap rails before gracefully falling into the water, and from here we're basically home free. We arrive at this waterfall, which you might instinctively think isn't a road, but if you think about it, it's the only path forward, and your wheels are normal during this section. To avoid any possible debate, we jump onto this wall and land in more water. After boating around, we reach this section, which kind of forces you to briefly jump onto this ramp before getting back onto the off-road. I'm still putting this track in the possible category, since I don't think a ramp or a waterfall should be considered a road. Alright, those are the only 4 tracks which are straight up possible. Up next, we've got the tracks which are just barely not possible. I would say Shy Guy Bazaar unfortunately goes into this category. At first, I was going to argue this section of the track is more like a weird sidewalk thing, but the more I look at it, the more I felt like it was a weird section of road they just kept adding lanes to. It's so close, and if I could just consistently jump onto the walls, it would be easy to pull off. Getting good items during a normal race could also be another pathway to victory. Moving on, Whistletop Summit is also really close. After starting the race, you can immediately hop onto this grind rail, and from there you can literally take grind rails all the way around the track without touching any road. The only problem is when you return to the finish line, you're forced back onto the road for just a little bit. No matter what I tried, I wasn't able to make this jump from this grind rail back onto the one we started with. Again, if you could consistently get items, you could probably easily make it. That's going to be a recurring theme for these next 2 categories. Items could be the key. For Whistletop and a couple of the other tracks, you could even theoretically end things off with a bullet bill to cross the finish line without touching the road. Next, Koopa Troopa Beach also feels like it should be doable, but less so than the preceding 2. Most of the track is surrounded by water, but there's this one section where you're forced to drive on the road. This jump feels larger than Whistletop's, even with a feather, but if you could figure it out, then it would be an easy victory. You might want to argue this track is possible because sand isn't a road, but in my mind, it kind of becomes one when it's the only material making up the entire track. Lastly, we've got the tracks which are a huge stretch, but I think could be theoretically doable. Firstly, Mario Bros. Circuit. Okay, so in the beginning you can drive into this off-road and get onto these rails. Unfortunately, when you reach this small tunnel, you can't drive along the walls long enough without Isaac Newton getting in the way. If you get past this though, it's pretty easy driving until you reach this point. This also seems like it should be the end, but amazingly you're just barely able to charge a jump at the perfect angle to make it from this dirt directly onto this grind rail, which leads you straight back into the safety of the off-road. Unfortunately, from here things get bleak. The first jump over this pit stop road is just barely doable, but there's not enough angles or objects to work off of to make the second work out. Maybe if you don't count this dirt road as an actual road, it's fine. Which I guess I was already kind of doing, considering the exact same dirt road is in front of this grind rail, which already throws a wrench into things. It's a massive stretch, But if this in the tunnel could somehow get resolved, then Mario Bros. Circuit would be doable. This next track wouldn't necessarily require more skill than me, but instead a lot more luck. Salty Salty Speedway is like entirely water. The only problem is the very beginning, which funnels you into this small section you have to drive on. If you could just figure out a way to avoid this, preferably by traveling up the waterfall, you could basically avoid every road on this track. It would require you to get like 3 feathers though, if feathers even make this jump possible in the first place. This track is probably the least likely to be possible on this list, but I'm throwing it here because, unlike every other impossible track, this one doesn't have any other sections of Forest Road. Lastly, I'll give an honorable mention to Peach Beach. The first lap is actually doable. You get onto the grass quickly, and from there you can drive onto this ramp. We're able to make it all the way around and complete the first lap, but unfortunately for us, Nintendo decided new content was a good idea. There might be something here if you could just hop onto this grind rail consistently, but I didn't even bother trying to tackle the rest of the track. It's just so dense with not a lot to work off of. If you could hypothetically get to this roof though, you could pretty easily travel towards the water and be completely home free. Alright, that's every track which you're able to beat without driving. Every other track in the game typically features many sections which funnel you onto a road or are just made up entirely of track. A quick note on the intermissions. I didn't investigate all of them. In fact, I didn't investigate most of them, because there are a lot. But in general, I feel like you can beat most without touching the ground. There's usually always either off-road or grind rails which you can take to avoid the main pathway. The biggest problem which consistently pops up is whenever the road diverges like this. You could argue that these roads aren't part of the main road which you are taking. But let's be real, man, that's a road! If you're wondering if any cups in the Grand Prix or Knockout Tour are beatable without driving on a road, no, absolutely not. Why would you even think to ask that after watching this video? There's not any set of tracks which don't feature some sort of forced road. With Knockout Tour, the even bigger issue is that since you're constantly driving off the road, you end up falling drastically behind everyone else, which results in you getting knocked out. Before wrapping up this video, I have a couple more points I want to mention. For this challenge, I focused on completing these tracks during time trials. It's possible items could play a big role in a lot of these tracks, maybe even ones I didn't cover. Additionally, I did all of this in single player. Using multiplayer would allow you to set up other races as sort of bounce pads to skip otherwise impossible sections. I wanted to keep this video focused on tracks which are possible in average play, but that could be a really fun thing to investigate. Not me though. Get like Game Champ 3000 or someone on that. I don't have the time or patience. Next, I mostly attempted this with Pianta in the pipe frame cart. Why, you may ask? Because he's my main and I like to play as him. I don't think the stats on the carts would affect any of these tracks too much, but it's possible a different combination might have a superior jump or something. The last point, which I really want to stress, is that if you liked this video, you should subscribe and check out some of my other stuff. I did a video like this one recently where I found out how much power Chibi Robo would actually use, and another where I analyzed Bowser's Fury World design. Okay, thanks for watching.